we are here to talk about the child outcome summary. And Henry Matthews, who is one of our newest consultants, and Kelly Lansott will be joining me. I'm Shelley Palumbo. We're here to talk about the COS and nothing but the COS. So what do you think? Let's start. Objectives for today. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the COS statements. We want to ensure that you understand why we're completing the COS. We want to make sure that when we have those conversations with families, we're able to convey that. We want to discuss the importance of the eval and the assessment and everything in between, and how that fits in with our child outcome summary statements. We want to learn to follow a consistent process. That's one of the goals today, to increase our accuracy, well, across the state, but within your teams as well. We want to discuss how and why we involved parents in this process, which, hint, spoiler, it's all along the way. And we want to discuss the importance of the team and become familiar with the tools. So there is so many tools out there. There's tools to introduce families to this process. There's tools for us to do within this process. So we're going to talk about some exciting new tools. All right, so what is the COS? Is it something that we do within our process? Absolutely. COS is a summary. It's that simple. It's a summary of the child's strengths and needs and 3 broad areas of function. Those outcomes incorporate areas of function for all children that will help them across various settings and in situations that they encounter every day. And it all starts with the information that we gather along the way, through observation, through discussion with parents, through interview, through our child assessment, through our evaluation. So that is how that is gathered. And everybody's responsible for gathering this information. So service coordinators, the evaluation and assessment team, our providers, our PSPs, whoever's involved in the team and seeing these families, that's who's involved in gathering this data. So why do we measure it? It tells us, our programs, how we make a difference for our children and families that we support and serve. It supplies information that we can use to improve early intervention supports and services. So it's a little bit about us and how we can measure our progress. It also provides data to stakeholders, to families, to taxpayers, to service providers. So there's a couple different reasons why we do this child outcome summary. How's it gathered? I think I said, all along the way, through assessment, through eval, through observation. And we don't necessarily adjust the age of the child when completing the child outcome summary. And I already said the who. It's all of us. It's the IFSP team. And when you think about who the IFSP team is, it's the service coordinator, it's our eval and assessment team, it's our providers, and definitely at the center of all that is the parent. So we are all responsible for this information. Long gone are the days that, a service coordinator is, kind of going through those outcome statements, choosing that. This is a team effort. So the expectation is that the whole team has knowledge about the process, knowledge about how to talk to families in regards to the process, and knowledge about how to complete it. And so hopefully that's what we'll get to today.
Yeah, and to add on, that's for the initial, the annual, and at exit. You want
absolutely
annual and exit. You definitely need the PSP and ESSPs, the family involved, in the same as exit. You want to keep a consistent process through every step in which we determine those ratings.
Yep. And then I think we talked about it, but I think sometimes we underestimate the information that we get during the beginning contacts. So from those referral sources, when we initially talk to the family on the phone to find out their priorities and their concerns. So that step ladder, so to speak, these are the steps that we're going to take to then develop that IFSP, those outcomes, and that child outcome summary. So it is a process. This is our IFSP process. We need to make sure that we're gathering information along the way and communicating with our team members. And I know that that's difficult, and we're going to try and, brainstorm some ideas along the way as we have this webinar as to how we can do this differently in terms of communicating everything that we've gathered along the way for this child and family. We do a lot at the welcome, so we're going to give some of that information to our team members during our team meetings at the welcome. We're going to share that information that the evaluation and assessment team has obtained. The team should be ensuring that the information is shared with the service coordinator to integrate everything into the IFSP. It's important to note that each of the steps is interrelated, meaning that whatever's gathered, it really does build upon, because the information that we gather in the beginning, then we're allowed to have some of those deeper diving conversations, make sure that we're clarifying information, make sure that we have the right people at the meetings, so we're getting the correct information, the most important information where that child is spending their time. So the how is conversations, observations, interactions, all the above. So I'll just throw out a question. So, thinking about all of that. So what does the teaming process look like, for your team, in your county, in your region? So we talked a little bit about the IFSP process and part of the evaluation. Obviously, we're going to administer one of those approved tools, Bailey or Battelle, to kind of determine we're in or out. We're going to make sure that we're getting somebody with that area of expertise, somebody who's been trained on the tool. We're going to think about other ways that perhaps maybe we need to make this child eligible, right? So informed clinical opinion. And then we're going to ensure that assessments are conducted in the way that gets those strengths and needs and the areas of function. So thinking about that, how does that look like via Zoom right now? Making sure that the scores from the evaluation and those then translate into that functional information that's meaningful to your families. We need to be sharing information from the eval assessment that focuses on functional skills rather than skills that have little meaning. So for example, if we're not able to string beads, what does that mean? What's that mean for our eye-hand coordination? What's it mean for feeding? What's it mean in all of those settings? So really thinking about the meaning of the information that you're getting from that evaluation. Kel?
We are now starting with the assessment process. And the assessment process is another way, and I would say the major way, that you get information about families that's truly going to inform the child outcome summary process. Assessment includes observations of the child, observation of the family-child interactions, parent interviews, interviews with caregivers, review of medical records, and the use of various assessment tools. We no longer require specific assessment tools be used, but we do know that some professionals in the field do like to continue to use specific assessment tools. One of the things that we strongly encourage is observation, because you can gain a lot of information by just observing that child's interactions. And if you have the ability to, even if it's through videotape, being able to observe that child in multiple settings. Because what we do know is children look very different in multiple settings. A child will perform very differently sometimes at childcare than they will with mom or dad. So when you're doing that program planning piece and looking at your child outcome summary, you really are going to want to look at that child in multiple settings. Your assessment does include a review of the evaluation. And part of that evaluation is, part of that assessment is going to help you identify areas of need for that child in each area of development. So there's a child assessment, and then there's a family-directed assessment. The child assessment focuses on the child and the child's needs, and the family-directed assessment focuses on the family. So the family-directed assessment gets at how is that child's delay or disability impacting that family's ability to function. Again, what would that family like to do in 180 days or less that they can't do now? So again, it's more than just an isolated skill on a Bailey or a Battelle. It's more than just a score. How is this child's delay or disability impacting this family or this child's ability to function? Shelley alluded to stringing beans or macaroni. It's not about necessarily the stringing of the beads, it's the skill that goes behind that. And if you don't master that skill, that's a fine motor skill, then what does that translate into everyday activities? Again, we use the word authentic assessment a lot in Ohio's EI system. And that authentic assessment is going to answer the questions what, how, and where. And an authentic assessment captures a real picture of the child. And that's going to occur in that child's natural environment. It's going to help guide functional, individualized IFSP outcomes. Again, it's about that child in their everyday natural environment. What is that child doing? How does that child's delay or disability impact that child's ability to function? How is the delay or disability impacting that family? How is it? What are some of the challenges that the family is having as a result? So you really are looking at this family as a whole, not just the parents. If you have the opportunity, even if it's over the phone with a release of information, to talk to child care providers, grandparents, again, you want to get multiple perspectives if you can. We often hear that, the 45 days isn't a lot of time to gather information. And oftentimes it isn't, but sometimes it's enough time to gather information via the phone or to talk to maybe one or two collaterals. Whereas at an annual review, you've had much more time to reach out and get medical records and things of that nature. So we want to get as much information as we can to get a good picture of that child. The more information you have, the more observation information you have, will really help validate some of the findings and things that the team has had. Again, so it's not about what Kelly thinks or what Shelley thinks per se. It's about what was observed and what we read in the medical reports. So it takes the personalness out of it and it puts it back on the research or the data. Service coordinators are responsible to ensure that all families are offered the ability to participate in a family-directed assessment. Some families may decline to participate. However, even if the family declines to participate in a family-directed assessment, the team is still responsible to gather that information. One of the things we as consultants will say is if a family is declining the family-directed assessment, we will say sometimes, how did you present it? because presentation is key. If you say to a family, hey, I've got, 2 hours more of questions, it's going to take about 2-3 hours, got a list, I'm probably going to say no too. But if you present it in a way that's more strength-based and positive, to say, I'd like to ask you some questions that's going to allow me to go back to the team and make some, good informed choices about your family and figure out what best supports, somebody is more likely to want to participate. Letting that family know that the information you are gathering is critical and vital to get that family the necessary supports and services that they need. And whoever is conducting that family directed assessment needs to make sure that the information that is gathered from that family directed assessment is shared with that entire team, because that information is vital to the team, especially when drafting IFSP outcomes, when drafting an IFSP period, because that family directed assessment should help lead to parents' priorities and concerns, which then often become IFSP outcomes. Making sure parents are provided with informed consent so they know what it is they're agreeing to participate in and what to expect. The functional assessment will lead to the development. So the functional child and family assessment will lead to right into the development of functional IFSP outcomes, and then lead to the final development of an IFSP. When you gather information about a child using the functional assessment process, you're looking at that child within their daily routines, and you're looking at the activities that the family likes to participate in. You're also looking at the COS child outcome summary process. You're looking at their daily routines, activities they participate in, and going through the child outcome summary process and rating that, the COS outcome summary. You're rating the narratives. You're gathering information about the child's interests, strengths, needs, and all of that is needed to develop functional IFSP outcomes. The IFSP team will then have a good picture of the child's development and how that child relates to the important people in his or her life. They'll know how that child functions in the family's preferred activities. So if the family has already said bowling is a big activity for me, our family, we love to go bowling. It's become a challenge almost to the point where we don't go anymore because my child doesn't like loud noises. Through the family directed assessment process, you may have found this information, which may then lead to an IFSP outcome. The family directed assessment and the child assessment, all the total complete functional assessment process will let you know what routines are going well, what routines are not going well. You can use the information that you gathered about routines that are going well to help you build intervention around the routines that are not going well. Family priorities should be evident because they'll be featured in the COS narratives and IFSP outcomes. And because of all the rich information gathered, the IFSP team is better able to identify the needed EI services to address the family's IFSP outcomes, because the team will be aware of the family's priorities and concerns. You can't conduct a functional assessment without involving the family. There's no way to do it without involving the family, because you have to gain information about that child from the family. They're the expert on their children. The family is going to be the one to tell you what that child's day looks like, what routines they participate in on a day-to-day basis, when there's modifications to those routines and why. When parents or family members share their observations, I would dare say that those observations are even sometimes more in depth and more detailed than the observations that we may share as professionals, because that parent has the ability to look at that child all throughout the day in multiple settings with multiple caregivers.
Hey, Kel, we've got a few questions in here on when the FDA should be completed. Should it be completed one time? Should it be completed at one specific point in the process? Where along in here is it usually finished?
There are some teams who start completing the FDA at the intake visit. Others complete the FDA, the family directed assessment, after the intake visit. Others complete it after eligibility is established. I think for me, I always encourage teams to start the FDA after eligibility has been established, because that is a lot of work to do for a family who is not eligible for early intervention. But I think that ultimately it depends on how your team is structured, who on your team is responsible to do the FDA.
We're now looking at writing the COS summaries and our 3 COS areas. It's important to know here when we're writing them what information goes in what place, and making sure we're providing great functional examples of that information. So there's 3 different COS areas that we write a summary in each one about. The first one is our developing positive social emotional relationships. So how children interact, play with their family, other adults, other children, things like that. Second being acquiring and using knowledge and skills, and how children learn and use basic language, communication skills, how they're showing us what they understand, using words to communicate their knowledge, things like that. And the last is taking appropriate actions to meet needs, which is how children gradually, grow in their independence, how they're moving around, how they're feeding themselves, a lot of those self-help skills, and using communication to get things that they want and need. We want to make sure that we're describing the child how they are working in their daily normal routines in each of these 3 areas. So it's not just a summary of the different domains that we collect information on the evaluation. This is really a more functional look at a child's daily life. So we want to see how they're doing it across all settings and different situations. So like Kelly mentioned there, we want to make sure we're talking to caregivers in each situation the child encounters, so we can collect information on what they look like in each of those places. Okay, so one of the handouts that we attached is the COS cheat sheet. This is just a little extra sheet to help you when you're completing assessment and when you're writing your summaries. So it's got some prompts on here of different topics to cover in each of these. It's divided children over 1 year, children under 1 year. Obviously, that's a big division. It's just to help a little bit. So there may be some topics that may not be appropriate for every kid within that age area. There may be stuff that you want to add in there that isn't covered on there. That's all okay. This is just one of the tools to kind of help you collect that right information. If we're looking at items that are on there for children under 1 year, say we're looking at positive social emotional. So it gives you a hint to ask questions about the child's relationship with family members, who lives in the house, where do they spend most of their time in the house, who do they spend it with, what is their response to people other than their major caretaker or major caretakers, what makes them smile, what makes them giggle, things like that. And so when you're asking these questions, you want to make sure you're getting good routine-rich information that you can then transfer into this narrative structure in these summaries. So you can learn that the child may typically fuss if mom and dad are not nearby, but then he smiles and wiggles when he sees them come back into view or back into the room. You can learn that mom and dad, he often babbles back and forth with mom and dad, and then he babbled back and forth with us today. You say that child smiles, sometimes giggles when mom plays peekaboo with him by covering and uncovering her face with a blanket, or he laughs whenever mom blows on his stomach, or when brother's being silly. You want to collect that information during your assessment and then be able to include it in that way within your summaries. So we briefly touched on what the 3 COS areas are, but we're going to go into it a little more in depth here. So with developing positive social emotional relationships, again, those are items we just kind of touched on there from our cheat sheet that we had there, but that they're really about interacting with others, and identification of emotions and themselves and their sense of mind and individuality as they develop as they get older. Acquiring and using knowledge and skills is really about their learning, showing us what they understand, how they analyze new information. Is it visually, tactile, oral? Do they bang stuff together? Do they watch and learn by others, or do they really like to jump in and explore on their own and aren't interested in seeing what other people are doing? What are some of their favorite toys? What does it look like when they play with those favorite toys? How are they problem solving? What happens when they encounter a difficult task? Do they persevere and try and work through it? Does the child get frustrated really quickly? All these kind of pieces of information are really important to collect, as well as stuff on their fine motor skills, their hand-eye coordination, how they're learning from that too. Is it a struggle from them? Is it something that they continue to work on? How does that work when it comes to reading books? Are they able to turn the pages on their own? Do they bring books to others to initiate reading? Do they just want to do it on their own? Are they pointing to identify different pictures? Do they verbally label those pictures? Any kind of these questions there where we want to be able to accurately describe how they are learning information that they encounter in the world, and then how they show the other people in their life that information that they understand. And communication is a huge part of that. But a lot of that language that we cover in here is about discussing what a child sees, hears, experiences, showing other people the knowledge that they have. And then our last area is taking appropriate action to meet needs. This is a lot of those self-help skills that I mentioned earlier, but you also want to include most gross motor skills, but not just isolated gross motor skills, but how they move from place to place to participate in favorite activities or normal routine activities. How do they walk upstairs to go up to bed or to bath time? How do they walk out to the car when it's time to go somewhere? We want to make sure that we're touching on these skills, but we're shedding them in a light that shows what they do during their normal routines. So that is much easier to show during mealtime. You want to describe what it looks like, where they're sitting, what some of their favorite foods. Do they sit for the entirety of the meal? Are they more of a grazer? Do they just kind of come and go as they want? How are they picky? How do they use utensils? Do they just use their fingers? Do they wait for mom or dad to feed them? All of that information is really key to include here. And then when it comes to expressive communication, you want to know both nonverbal and verbal, how they're expressing wants and needs. Are they answering yes and no questions? What happens when you give them a choice? All those items. And when we're asking about this information and including it, we want to make sure we're doing so functionally and that it's all encompassing in their daily routines and how they look. We want to paint that picture of what they look like on a normal day.
Agreed. So I think several of the, a lot of what Henry was just talking about, those skills. So yes, there were skills mentioned in the conversation. However, he took it back to those meanings. So I think we really need to think about this functionally. So it's not just, Sammy shows a skill in a specific situation. It's, how is she using those skills and actions across the settings and situations to accomplish something that's meaningful for her. So instead of just kind of thinking, Sammy makes eye contact, smiles, gives a hug. It's more about Sammy ran over to her sister when she got home from school, smiling and giggling the whole way, and ran over and gave her a hug. I mean, I think you think about all the skills, yes, that happens in that, but you really get that clear picture of what she's able to do, the context that she's able to do it in. So how she's able to do all of what she did within, and then thinking about those cause areas. So, a child points to or at pictures in a book versus how she's engaging with that book. I mean, I think you could even, say Sammy walked over, grabbed the book, walked over to mom, said book to mom or read or and then climbed up on mom's lap and started pointing or mooing. So I think it's more about having those clearer pictures of what they're able to do, what they're not able to do in those situations. So uses a spoon, yep, it's a skill we need, but what does that look like? We could be using that spoon and just pushing peas around on the tray table versus I'm able to scoop up and actually get food into my mouth functionally. So I think we have to kind of put that hat on and think about what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it means to that family, what it means, what were they able to accomplish.
So we're going to pull out and look at some examples here. We have a example of Sammy. If you want to pull out your COS cheat sheet during this, that may be helpful. So in these summaries, we want to summarize all the input about a child's strengths and needs across routine settings and all the people that are participating in the IFSP process. And even if there are people that are regularly part of the child's life who weren't able to participate, we still want to include information about them. This really sets the stage for determining our COS ratings and writing outcomes. It really paints a picture and states how well the child is developing and participating in activities at home and in the community, any place that they normally go. We, again, like Shelley was just explaining, we really wanted to focus on function and how they're using skills to participate in daily life. You may see some information repeated here from the assessment summary or some observations that you made during your evaluation. That you collect that information all before, but this is where you put it all together to really paint that picture. So service coordinators, a role in here is that they're facilitating the conversation about these outcomes and everyone on the IFSP, but a lot of the work in writing these and sharing these back with the families comes to those evaluators and assessors. If you see here within Sammy's sample, developing positive social emotional skills, you'll see that it touches on relationships, who lives in the house, how she's giving greetings, goodbyes, eye contact, her response to name, what makes her smile or laugh, any social games she plays, how she shows interaction towards people in her family and others. She uses the names of family members to interact with them or to get their attention. Her behavior around other kids, what play looks like, is it parallel play, is it associative play, those kind of items. What happens when another child tries to take something she wants. Even a little bit on pretend play here with others. There is some, a social emotional aspect to pretend play and whatnot. When reading these, I think we want to keep in mind that I think Sammy's about a 23-month-old, if that's helpful when you're reading these. So a side note here, I want to mention is that when we're writing these, a well-written summary really incorporates that observation and parent report and merges it into one fluid narrative. The things that we observe and the information we get is really important, but we also want to know that when we're providing early intervention services, we're not just trying to help the family in those times that we're there and that we're present. We want it to be pervasive and to help the family throughout all their normal routines and things like that. So the best way we can start that process is by really painting the picture of what a child looks like during those normal routines. And we'll take that information that we get from the observation as well as the parent report, and they can build on each other. One can confirm the other and whatnot, but we want to really make it a fluid narrative together. So instead of having to explicitly always state what was observed during evaluation compared to what the parent reported, there's still times in which we want to do that and make that clear, but it doesn't always have to be done. The information can be joined together to paint that picture of what the child looks like during the day, which you'll have the nuance because it's sourced from your observation, but you'll also get that information that they report to you. And then the things the parent reports to you, you can be confident in the way you're writing it based on your observation if you observe the same thing. So if you look within this sample here, things that can come from both observation and parent report may be us talking about how Sammy waves. It may be something that the family reported that she said, oh yeah, she waves hi and bye to people. Sometimes she'll say bye to daddy when he goes to work, things like that. But it's also, you want to note did she do those things? Did she wave to you when the team came in for your assessment or for your evaluation? Did she say hi? Did she tell you bye-bye when it went time to leave? If dad had to go to work while you were there, did she say bye to dad then? So you get both this information from both parent report and observation, and then you want to use that to craft how you're writing your narrative. You can see the same thing with pretend play. If the parent reports that she engages in pretend play a lot, and then say during your evaluation you brought out a baby doll and she played with that, you can then confirm what was reported to you. There's lots of different items that you'll see throughout there. The real goal is to make this be a fluid picture of how the child looks during a normal day. All right, so we're going to do a little activity here. I'll give you about 5 minutes to read through this. If you were signed up, prior to today, you probably received a sample of these from Shelley, so you may have already read through it once, but I'm going to give you some time to read through this area. And I want you to think about where in the assessment and eval process you would have learned about each of these pieces of information about Sammy, and compare the information that's included here on what's on your cheat sheet. See if you agree with which cause area the writer put all of this information. Is there any information missing? Is there anything you would do differently? So take a few moments, read through this, compare it to the resources we gave you, the resources you use normally, and send your thoughts in through the chat box. And again, Sammy's 23-month-old. Yeah, so just a reminder, while you guys are reading through these and thinking about it, let us know where in the process you'd be getting this information that you see here in the narrative. Does the information match up with the cheat sheet? Does it match up with where you would place information? Would you put it in the summary? Is there anything that you think needs to be added or is missing? Any information on your thoughts on this summary and where in the process you collect all this information. All right, we're getting lots of good responses here. Seeing lots of people saying that, collect this through assessment and that FDA, the child assessment and the FDA, a lot of this information, you're going to need to get through that child assessment rather than an evaluation. You may incorporate some of your child assessment questions into while you're asking stuff for the evaluation, but just that information you're getting from the evaluation isn't going to cover a lot of these topics in the depth that you see here. There's some comments here that people like that there's information about any regression that she may have had, like with the duck, things that she was saying before but isn't saying now. That's a great example of making sure we get parent report, and I think that is exactly something I'm happy you guys are noticing. There is lots of information that we're not just going to get from our evaluation. There's so much more that we can get from that child assessment and asking those deeper questions as well as our FDA. We have a note here that there's some strengths in the needs section, and I think that's okay if you're talking about a need, but she has some strengths as part of, that are closer related to that need. We want you to include the strengths and the needs and to be able to write about them, but we also want it to make sense. So there's not always a perfect delineation between these two. You are going to see some overlap. You may mention something in the strengths and in the needs a little bit, and you may mention the same skill. It may be applicable to multiple sections in here too. It's okay to have some overlap there. We really just want you to be painting that good picture there. So different things that there could be some more information about eye contact and how that would be related to her learning or her imitation, as well as describing what body parts she recognizes. I think those are good catches there. Those are all things that are missing here. And again, these are summaries about, a real child. We're not saying that, this is full encompassing here, but it shows us that there's information that we want to include in all of our summaries, but there is some, we want to keep them individualized, and there is some variance there. We want to make sure that we're including lots of good information here and doing so a little differently. I think some notes in here too is that people like that, noticing that there's things that she's not yet doing rather than saying that she's not doing them. Those are good things to touch on there.
So there were a couple questions as well, I think. Do you want to try and
Sure, we can go through
wrap
some of those.
those? So one of them was, so what happens when a family doesn't necessarily agree to the family directed assessment? And I know that Cal touched on this a little bit. I think we really need to make sure that we wrap ourselves around making sure that we understand why we do the family directed assessment and almost practice role play. I know I said role play, making sure that you're comfortable having this conversation, because if we're able to convey to families that this information that we're able to gather at this moment in time and then all along the way, it really does cut down on some time of guessing, and we're able to get the most accurate picture of their routines, their families, their strengths, their needs. So not just the child's, and able then to take all of that information and move towards our outcomes and our strategies, because that's the key then to making progress and making movement. So if we're able to convey that to a family in that way, my guess is many will say, okay, I understand now. If they're still not agreeing, or if they still don't understand, then obviously we're going to have to get this from observation, from our other assessments, the information that we gather along the way. It's not going to be as easy as a process. I can't stress that enough. Our service coordinators, whoever's doing our family directed assessments, really needs to encompass and be comfortable with the conversation, know how to present that to families, so they have it's that informed consent. This is what we do with the information. And then I think there was another one in terms of how do we convey to our team members that the information that we gather for COS is all of the above. So how do we help the team members understand the importance of observation and interview questions from the evaluation, from the assessment? How do we do that? Do you want to handle that one, Henry?
Yeah, I think that also, I mean, it builds on a few different pieces here too. I mean, we want to collect all this information throughout the process and be able to us taking notes on the information we had and making sure it matches up with, and then writing it in a fluid way. It may take time for us. We may have to write it some in different stages here, but and share it with each other. I think we also saw a question here about who's the person completing these. When is this kind of done? And that's going to vary by the team a little bit, and who's on your evaluation, who's on your assessment. If you have your two evaluation assessors, if they can work on all three of these at the same time, one person can write one point and then share with the other. They can give their input. You could do so on a cloud-based document where you can both write in it. Some places will break down like, okay, if you can cover most of the things in the first section, that'd be great. I'll work on the third one. We can work together on the second one. And then at the end, you kind of just review what the other person put and add anything else in there. There's different ways to do it. You want to make sure that you're getting all the input from your team and you're getting the most information you can. Anything else, Shelley? Are there any questions you see?
So there's one last one. So how are teams collecting both the evaluation and assessment data?
So I think that is a
and
good
maybe
question.
Yeah, because I also feel like that does depend on your team and how conversations take place. Do we have a shared drive? Do we all live in the same place? Do we have an emailing? I feel like, and I know that the virtual thing, and I think that's one of our next slides, it presents a unique then set of issues. We used to be able to have conversations in the hallway and after team, but we need to make it more purposeful now. And so
on the IFSP though, Shelley.
Well, so sure, but I think that just that conversation as well.
I mean, I think that, you could probably jot down different notes and things, but we want to get into the habit of documenting things and collecting documentation in the right place.
Right.
So that we're not, documenting in 4 or 5 different places. I think that then becomes the issue. if you're documenting in more than one place, then information is lost and then it doesn't get transferred to the right place. So I think how I would answer that question is, I would look at it more as a process question and not a documentation question. How do we want to make sure that the team is cohesively completing the document and getting the right information in the right place?
Yep.
Yeah, and so completing the evaluation is just you doing your Bailey, your Battelle to determine eligibility. You're going to get a little bit of this information there, maybe during your adaptive sections, and you're going to get some observation there, but that's not just all you're doing. You also want to be doing assessment, and some assessment can go on at the same time you're doing, your evaluation, but a lot of it may come after or before. I mean, it's really how you're asking these other questions to get these other pieces of information that you're not going to get just from an evaluation. Assessment is really where you want to make sure you're getting that functional skill set. You're asking questions on how it looks like during the normal day, what their favorite toys are, a lot of that individualized information. If we just use the information we got from the evaluation, any kid who scored the same on evaluation, their summaries would look exactly the same as another. That's not what we want here. We really want these to paint a true picture of what the child is looking like during their normal routines. All right, so we're about to hit a break here. Just real quickly looking at this third, example of summary here. When you're reading through it and you've seen it here, looking again at these skills and realizing, all right, this is not just information that we are going to get from an evaluation. We really know that this is stuff that we are going to need to be asking more in-depth questions during our assessment process to get this clear picture. So we're going to take a 10-minute break here. While you guys are taking that break, use that time to reflect and think on and send in any questions from the first half here that you may still have. Also, because of our, the current situation of the world and with the pandemic that's going on and whatnot, most things are done virtually right now. So thinking about how do we collect the same large amount of information within the 45-day timeline when we're doing things virtually. Think about that. Send us your thoughts in the question box, and take a break, see what you need to do. We'll start back up at 10:20. All right, we're not going to get started with the presentation just yet, giving people another 2 minutes, but we are going to start to just look through the thoughts people put into the question box and whatnot and start to talk about those, but we won't start up until, for another 2 minutes working through the actual presentation. Some of the lots of great information coming in here about, how people are using, cloud-based software and email and staying on video chats just an extra few minutes to really debrief and make sure people are on the same page is all really great things to have. And a lot of us do comments here that, a silver lining of the pandemic and whatnot, of having to do everything virtually, it's made everyone a lot more comfortable using technology, which has been really beneficial for helping to write the COS and collecting this and doing assessment, things like that. Yeah, just making sure we're really using the opportunities we have on Zoom calls to ask those deeper, more meaningful questions, getting families to send us videos of their child doing stuff or have daycare send us videos. It's really made us need to utilize some of the pieces from alternative sources that we hadn't really been using before, but are able to now. And I think, eventually, if we do get back to some normalcy, these skill sets we'll want to continue to utilize to make sure we're getting all the information from different sources and being able to really see the child and how they act and what skills they have during the normal day.
Agreed. Just reading some of this stuff, folks have some really good ideas, on ways to kind of work around and making sure that those conversations happen, email, maybe side Zoom conversations instead of conversations in the hall. So it sounds to me like they're utilizing technology and trying to get, those videos from even other caregivers. So that gives us even a better picture of what's going on in those routines.
Exactly. I like the one person even, there's some self-awareness here of saying, we do a really good job of doing ongoing assessment and things like that for annuals and exits and whatnot. But that, those initials is really something they're continuing to work on. and that a lot of the information they get is just during the battelle or the help. And in those situations, I encourage you to keep taking those opportunities you have during the, even during the battelle or once you've completed the battelle, if you have, assessment questions, further in-depth stuff to ask, use that opportunity while you have the family there to ask them. If you need to talk to the family at another time or communicate through, a different method to ask some more of these questions, do so. Find the way to collect it. There's a million different ways to do it, but don't just feel like, oh, well, I didn't ask those questions during the eval, so I can't ask them. There's lots of opportunities to continue to get that deeper information through a rich child assessment process. We're going to move on to and use our little poll activity here. Tell us what you would, what COS rating you would give Emma. Determine your ratings for each of these two summaries as you normally would. If you have a tool you usually use, go ahead and do that. We're just trying to get a reading on how everyone's doing ratings right now. All right, so here's Emma's acquiring and using knowledge and skills. Take 2 minutes, refresh yourself on the narrative, determine kind of what rating you would give her, and then we'll put up the poll in 2 minutes. All right, so should see the poll question up on your screen there. So I'm going to go ahead and show the results here. Now I want to let you guys know that you're gonna wait a few seconds or a few more minutes before we kind of go over what we think is an accurate rating here. I want you to use this to see that there is a big variance into what everyone thinks the rating may be. So if you see here, we have less than 50% of the people think that Emma's showing occasional use of some age-expected skills, and then about 29% think that she's not yet using skills expected of her age, and then another 13% saying she's showing some emerging or immediate foundational skills. So I think we see a big divide there between does she have skills that are age expected or not, which is the difference there between the 2, 3, or the 4. So if she does have age expected skills, then we may say that she's showing some occasional use, but if we don't think she has any age expected skills, we're going to see down in these lower ratings. So if you notice here, there is a pretty big variance in what we're seeing here. So we definitely is showing us that we need to do some things to improve our inter-rater reliability. Again, later we'll use the decision tree that we're about to roll out to determine what an actual accurate rating of Emma may be. We're going to repeat the same activity for Ed here. I'll give you guys 2 minutes to read through and familiarize yourself with Ed's summary again, and then I'll put up a new poll. All right, launching the poll. So relative to same age peers, what was the COS rating we would give Ed? Share the results. So again, I think we see a large amount of variance here. Looking at 30% is a 4, 32 is a 3, 23 is a 2 here. So yeah, a lot of different opinions here. Thinking that we may need to do what we can and to work on that inter-rater reliability. But that's exactly why we're here, why we're doing this training today, everyone. So this is why we're doing it, and this is why the next half of this training is going to really be on developing that consistent process to follow it and seeing if we can get a little more accuracy and consistency between everyone. All right, so again, in a little bit, we'll come back to these scenarios and we'll go through this decision tree and our new process together and determine a rating there and what we think is accurate. So now we're going to go into developing the IFSP with the family, our preparation, our next steps in IFSP development. So if you also notice here, there's a link here to the ECTA Center to add on to what we were talking about before with completing this whole process using technology during the pandemic. There's a lot of really helpful resources here with hints, guidance on really how to continue to have a strong COS process via technology during the pandemic. So I suggest that everyone checks that out after the training today. So seeing there from our poll questions, we saw some inconsistency in how we're doing some ratings. So our question to you guys is, how do we strive for consistency when every situation is unique? When, every team is unique in how we follow this process, every child, the family, the information gathered through eval assessment isn't equal every time. There's going to be lots of unique situations and inconsistencies amongst the process. So what can we do to strive towards more consistency? What do you guys think? We'll give you a minute or so to put in some answers there. And that link on the previous slide, if you download the slides via the handouts, you should be able to access any links there too, and as well as stuff in on. I think we're already starting to see some good answers in here, and I one thing I'm seeing here is that this is really hard to do. The COS rating is hard to do, hard to get consistency with, and you're not going to get disagreement here from us. This is a difficult process, and it's us trying to add, some science and, some consistency into it, but it's also part art too. And the more if we can develop some more consistency amongst our teams, amongst different individuals, and then the more we practice it, we'll be able to get better at it and have some more consistency. But it's not easy to do. That's certainly the case.
What we do know, Henry, is that the service coordinator is responsible to lead the IFSP meeting, and that the family is part of the team, and that the team members have to be are an active part of that IFSP conversation. The service coordinators should be making sure that rich information is gathered at the evaluation and assessment. That service coordinator is responsible to make sure that surface level information is not what's gathered at that evaluation and assessment. That they make sure to ask those digging deeper questions so they can get that rich information. So it's not about simply those yes/no questions, but really those digging deeper questions like, what would you like to do in 180 days that you can't do now? So you can really get a good picture of what's going on with that family and what's that family's priorities and concerns.
Definitely, and I think that ties well into this theme here of including the family in the process, making sure we do to get all that rich information and lead it to those outcomes and to some ratings here. Yeah, no, excellent job there.
And the IFSP team should those conversations the IFSP team should have is what it should be about, what they can do and what supports are needed to support whatever child and family outcomes are developed. Because at the end of the day, that is what we are there to do for the family. We are there to support them to achieve their IFSP outcomes. That's our sole purpose. So again, and those IFSP outcomes are based on the family's priorities and concerns.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot with the answers that people put in for that question we just asked too, that's matching up with that, and this idea too that all the information that's collected needs to be shared amongst everyone, that there needs to be communication between the whole team. If everyone needs to be on the same page, yeah, I think that is a big piece of it there. So when everyone does work on it together, of writing the summaries, confirming the summaries, have all the information they want, and then determining those COS ratings, that's how you're going to get some more consistency there. I think looking at our next slide here, we have put out this flow chart of ways to include the family in the COS process, and if we follow this flow chart, we'll have more family inclusion, and we'll be able to follow a more consistent process. So this tool will help summarize and guide you through the process of including and sharing the IFSP with the family. You'll know it's also included in our handouts here. We'll go through it via slides, but if you look in the handouts section, it's labeled as COS flow chart. You'll be able to have your own PDF version. To keep it simple here, this flowchart, this is after you've written the summaries. You're ready to do IFSP development, and the first step is to summarize the skills included in the COS area. So you would start with your positive social emotional developing positive social emotional relationships, and you summarize the skills that would be included in that summary. Then you read back, you share the child's summary that you wrote to the family. Then we review the COS rating process with the family. The service coordinator is already going to have touched on it some, but you'll review it again there. Then you will provide examples of age expected skills to the family, and then we walk through the decision tree. So we'll go into each of these steps a little more in depthly here, but it's this basic process that we'll walk through. Some people may be doing something similar, some people may not, and it's all kind of you figuring out what works best for your team, but we will see more consistency and more family involvement if we follow this flow chart. One thing to notice on his roles here, the service coordinator's role throughout this is to make sure the family understands, why there are COS ratings, how they're used, each of these steps of this process, as well as help navigate the family through the decision tree. And the providers, though, are going to also be doing some more of the sharing, providing examples of age expected skills, and really facilitating use of this decision tree there and making the final call on the rating. It's essential that every team member understands the COS summary process and what it looks like, and that you're prepared to go through this with some consistency so we can have that consistency when we do. This first step of summarizing the skills included in the COS area. Just a note here, this flowchart on the slide here matches up with the flowchart you have. It's just a little simplified version just for the PowerPoint, but you're welcome to reference the one that you have in your handout. It has a little more information on it. So, summarizing the skills included in the COS area. We want to just give the family a quick, briefing of what we're about to read back to them, what their summary entails. So, it may look like, we're just going to read back to you here how your child interacts and plays with their family, other adults, and other children. And then you can go into the summary. We say, I'm about to read back to you all the information that we've collected throughout this process. We want you to put your input, tell us what you think. This first area we're going to read to you is developing positive social emotional relationships. And this is how your child interacts with parents, strangers, other children, how they communicate their feelings and use social language like hi, bye, family names, self-identification, things like that. You really just want to give the family a quick summary of what you're about to read back to them. So other places you can find similar summaries would be on our actual IFSP document. There's a brief summary there. You could read that to the family. Some of the age anchoring tools have summaries on them. You can combine descriptions from these three to make your own, as long as it's accurate and it flows and it makes sense to the family. On the COS cheat sheet, you'll see there's summaries written there. You could read this kind of back to the family. Okay, I'm about to read to you, a summary on acquisition and use of knowledge and skills. This is how your child learns, shows us what they understand, how he uses words to tell us what they want, things like that. But again, we're just giving a quick preface to the family so they know what information to expect that we're about to read to them. The next step is then to quickly, share the child's summary that you wrote. When reading the COS narratives to families, it's really important to tell them beforehand that you're summarizing the information you've collected from those who participated in eval, assessment, the team's observations, the FDA. You want to make it clear to them that if they don't agree with anything you say, or if they have anything to add, or feel as though their child acts a little bit differently in other settings, to just please let us know and we can change it. We want this to be a good picture of what their child's doing and looks like throughout their normal day. Once you read back your summary to the families, which we'll dive into a little bit in a little, you always ask them if that sounds like their child, or is that a good picture of their child? Is there anything you want me to add or change? Things like that, to give them another opportunity to provide input on there. Asking the questions in a way like that of, is this a good picture? Is there anything you want me to change? Does this sound like them? Is a little softer than saying, is this right, or do you agree, where they're going to feel pressure to say, oh yes, even if they don't. We want these to be accurate. We want them to be involved. And if they feel like you did a great job summarizing what their child is doing and what their child looks like, then they're going to feel like, all right, this wasn't a complete waste of my time, all this information I gave them. They really listened to what I said, and that they were able to really paint that picture for me for what my child looks like and how they're acting, during the day. We want to make sure this is accurate because the information in these summaries is directly used to determine the COS rating. The next step here is reviewing the COS rating process with the family. This is something you would only really need to do before determining the rating for developing positive social emotional relationships, because you're going to review it there, and then by the time you get back to acquisition, use knowledge and skills, use of appropriate behaviors, the family will remember this. But for this first step through, after we share the summary of developing positive social emotional relationships, and the family agrees that's a good picture of them, or they gave us a little piece of information that we added, we then want to just quickly review the COS rating process with the family. The service coordinator will have already spoken to the family about this. We just want to briefly review it to make clear that this is the step in which we're determining these ratings. It can be done by the EISC again, or by the assessor who's sharing, whatever's comfortable works with your team.
So absolutely. So knowing that we're going to be having these conversations with families, we hope that that service coordinator has shared information kind of all along the way to prepare this family for this particular conversation. We need the right people at the table. We need the right information at the table. So we need to be sharing some information up front. So during some of those initial conversations, contacts, we could potentially send them the child outcome summary letter, which is on our website. There's a handbook that talks in detail about what this COS rating is, why we do it. We need to let families know that there's a reason why we do it. And it's not because we said so, it's because we have stakeholders that need this information. We use the information about progress to not only measure our child and our family, but we also use that information to measure how we're doing as a program, how we're doing as a state. We report this information to OSEP. So we have to make sure that we're informing families of the reason why we're doing this. So not just informing them about how the process works, but why. So what does this family know? When we talk about comparing skills and strengths and needs to peers, it can be a sensitive subject. So we need to set this up for us so it's a successful conversation. We need to let them know that by looking at how well their child is doing in each of the 3 areas, we can determine what they need in order to become more involved in the family activities. The information gathered about their child will also help develop individual outcomes and strategies to help kind of guide the child's progress. So we're having purposeful conversations on how, why, and setting this conversation up for success. Stressing that we need their information. As a parent, they know their child best. As a caregiver or grandma, they see lots more than we can see in a small amount of time. So making sure that we say, we need your observations. We need you as a partner in this conversation. We really have to stress that, while it's difficult sometimes to have these conversations, we need to have an open and honest conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about how we measure those outcomes, and let's think about how we can support this family. How did we listen to them? How did we set them up for success? How did we take our process and embed those 5 family outcomes? So just keeping the family at center while we talk about this process.
So once we've reviewed the COS rating process a little bit with the family, it should just be really quick, like you're saying. This is why we're doing it. The service coordinator's already mentioned this. Then we provide examples of age-expected skills, because that's really the first step of the actual COS rating process. You provide examples of age-expected skills, and then we walk through the decision tree. And once we follow those 2 steps there, we'll be able to get some more consistency and accuracy in our COS rating. When providing examples of age-expected skills, we want to do this because we're generating this COS rating about the child's functioning in their normal routines and then comparing it to their age-expected development. We just shared what the child was doing, so then we need to share age-expected skills so we can then compare them. Listing age-expected skills to the family also gives you a great opportunity to educate them on what is expected. Many of our families may not know what's expected here. They're not sure what their child should be doing. This may be their first child, or a previous child they have was doing skills maybe have done skills that their current child isn't doing, but they're not sure what's expected, or if someone was ahead of the curve, and what if someone may be behind the curve. So this gives us an opportunity to fulfill one of our roles of helping to educate parents on child development and what's expected, and as well as that we're then giving them this information, which will empower them and allow them to participate even more in this process. This is a great time to use one or multiple of the many resources that are out there. They're super helpful here. You can use them when if you're having a discussion with your team prior to IFSP development on what you think the rating may be, but it also will help you as professionals to tell the family, about age-expected skills and whatnot. That being said, those resources can be really helpful. It's your guys' jobs as experts in child development to use these tools as part of your knowledge base and decision-making process. The tools can't do everything for you. You guys are experts in this. Use this as one of the many things to help you share what's age expected. This decision tree process and the rating process we're talking about here is very different from completing the Bailey and getting an age equivalency score. These ratings are based on how the child operates normally within their daily routines and how functional skills are. So we also want to be sharing age expected skills in that same light. There's different places, different resources that we can get examples of age expected skills. Up here on the screen, we have a snapshot from the Larimer tool, as well as Virginia's Child Indicators booklet. The Virginia Indicators booklet was sent out by Shelley prior to, so that's just another tool to have. Every tool is a little bit different. They're all based on averages and not always on ranges of normalcy. Some may be based on ranges and not averages. So you're going to see some variance amongst tools. You're going to see some variance, in your opinion. We want them to be close, but as we know, what's age expected there isn't consistent amongst everyone. Every tool has it a little bit differently. But again, it's your job as professionals to read through the tools, use them to help you, but really form your opinion of what your team is considering age expected skills here. Something important to think about and note when we are sharing examples of age expected skills. We want the skills that we are highlighting in our child outcome summary to match up and be the same types of skills that we are providing age expected examples for. So the family has examples of how their child compares to their peers. If you shared that the kiddo's walking and then you shared the kids their age are walking, then it's very easy for you and for the family to answer that question of, does the child ever function in ways that we consider age expected? Yes, they're walking. It doesn't make sense to share a bunch of skills that the child's doing in your summary, and then when you go to share your age expected skills, you're like, oh, we'd expect a child of their age to do this and that, but the skills that you just said, you didn't talk about them in the summary, so you can't compare them. So we just want to make sure that when we're giving those age expected skills, they match up with the same types of things you shared in the summary. Here's an example using Sammy's narrative. So when we shared her summary, we shared a number of different things, including that she runs everywhere, likes climbing up on the couch to get the things she wants. She likes to stack pillows and jump off of them. She's helping with dressing to put her arms through her shirt, pulling her pants and shirt off, undoing her diaper, how she acts in bath time. We shared about how she's feeding herself with her hands and picks up food with her whole hand, what it looks like when she's using utensils. as well as when it comes to communication, she's not yet pointing to things she wants or pointing to things she finds interesting. We shared all of those great skills, so that when it comes time to share age-expected skills, we want to share the same types of things. So if you see over here, if we were using the Larimer tool to help us, we would say, okay, now it's time to talk about some things that other 23-month-olds are doing. We would expect 23-month-olds to their motor skills to be developing more and more. They'd get better at running, becoming better climbers. Some things they might do, climbing up onto furniture really well, climbing up the stairs. If they're in a crib, they might climb out of the crib. They're attempting to jump down from a step or a raised surface, as well as help more with putting on clothes and then feeding themselves with spoon and the fork, doing well with that, seeing less spilling there. They may be trying to wash their own face or hands, things that they've seen you do, they're now taking over and imitating. When it comes to communication, we'd expect a 23, 24-month-old to take someone by their hand, and lead them to what they want, and then use 2-word phrases to tell them exactly what it is. We would expect them to be answering yes or no questions, either with a head shake or with the words. So there we're sharing those skills of what we'd expect, fully knowing that they match up with the skills we just shared about the child. So when using these tools, see, we got a question here, like, do you recommend showing the tool to the family when you're going through it? I think you need to read each family on what you think is going to be helpful. If you're able to kind of eloquently just describe what we'd expect, that may go over better than giving them a big piece of paper with a bunch of words and information on it that they're going to have to absorb really quickly. You could use them in tandem together. Usually with this, I suggest, if we're going to give the family something, we want to be able there to explain and answer questions. We don't want to just give them a piece of information without being there to support and help them. So it's really, be careful if you are doing that, but we want the families to be informed. So the way that you think it's best for some family, there may be a family that you think it'll work really well with, that may be okay there. So, I want you guys to see where I'm going with this. You see how the summaries that we write match up with and can be used in tandem with age anchoring tools. Thinking about that, being strategic when we're sharing these skills. Once we've done that, we've shared examples of we've shared the summaries, we've shared examples of age expected skills. Now it's time to walk the family through the decision tree. Walking the family and team through the decision tree it can be our consistent way to compare the child's skills and behaviors with those expected for their age. And we know that we want to do this for state, federal purposes, but why do we want to do this with the family? Again, it's important to include the family in each step of the process as there's members of the team, and we want them to understand what's going on with their child, be informed about that. Their child wouldn't be involved with us if there was not a delay. When the evaluation assessment team determines that the child's eligible for services, this means that the child has a developmental delay or diagnosed condition likely to result in further delay that would merit early intervention, right? The parents have come to us because there's a concern about development. They might have a gut feeling that something's not quite right. They may think their child's not doing the same things that their older sister was doing at their age. We have some families that this is their first child and they don't yet have that knowledge about child development. But really, no matter the situation, we don't want to keep information about their delay hidden from them. We have an obligation and professional duty, to share what we know about development with families, and we're helping to educate them on what's age expected, just like we're helping them to educate them on interventions. We can be honest with families without being mean or cruel. And if their child's in EI, then they have a high likelihood that at some point, maybe sooner than later, that someone's out there is going to tell them that their child has a delay or does not have certain age expected skills. And I know personally, I'd much rather be the person to tell them that, or one of you guys, because I know that you'll do so with empathy and with tact. And that may not always be the case when someone else has this conversation with the family. I have full faith that everyone here is going to be able to do this and knows how this information should be communicated to a family. Plus, once we do that, we immediately follow this conversation with developing outcomes and strategies, to help that family reach their goals, help their child catch up with their peers and whatnot. So we're not just pointing out some, oh, we don't, your child doesn't quite have the skills we'd expect, and then leaving them there. We're immediately rolling into a solution-based mindset. We're looking at outcomes and things like that. So I think I got ahead of myself a little bit here, but this question of, is it family friendly to compare a child to his or her same age peers? If you guys have any input on that, go ahead and put it in the chat box. But I also know that Shelly and Kelly also have thoughts.
It is difficult to compare, and we always say, in other situations we would say, no, you don't compare two children to one another. Each child is unique. But in this situation, yes, it is family friendly to compare, but it's all in the way that you do it. And the reason why we really need to do this is because some of our children are going to be involved with some type of system for the rest of their life. And if we don't do it now, it'll be done at a later date. And one thing about early intervention, we're much more hands-on than some of the other systems. As kids get older, the systems tend to be much more hands-off. So the families are going to be told this information, and there's nothing like being blindsided and told all this information about your child, but your child's already been involved with a program for 3 years or 18 months, and you never knew the extent of your child's disability or diagnoses. So we want to make sure that our families are aware, and we can do it in a family-friendly way. But we do owe families the respect and the responsibility to be honest. And you don't necessarily have to compare them to we're not saying compare them to an actual child. What we're saying is, if you look at a developmental chart, so the Larimer or the developmental wheel, a child that within this age range should be doing these things, and your child is pretty much, if your child's 18 months, your child is doing more things that a 9-month-old child would do. But we do owe it to families to let them know truly where their child is functioning at. One, it'll give them a much better picture of what success looks like for their child. And two, they'll be much more knowledgeable about their child's delays or disabilities.
All right, rating outcomes as a team. Kelly, you want to tell us about the family's role in that?
Absolutely. Parents see their children in multiple settings, so they have much more information. Parents and caregivers have unique insights about their kids across daily settings and routines. So again, the parent is the expert. So again, cannot stress the importance of the family-directed assessment. And Shelley noted earlier, if your teams are struggling with getting parents to agree to do family-directed assessment or wanting some support on how to explain the family-directed assessment in a positive way so families are more willing to engage, please reach out to your program consultant, because we would be glad to support you, because the FDA process is critical. It is important that everyone on the team know about child development. The team members need to know what typical development looks like and what non-typical development looks like. I dare say if you don't know what typical development looks like, you wouldn't know what non-typical development looks like. It's important that we know typical child development and non-typical development, because we need to be able to explain these things to families. Sometimes families may have unrealistic goals for their children, and we need to know to be able to explain to them what their child should be doing at this age and things that are not age appropriate. All team members need to be aware of how to dig deeper. So again, not just settling for those surface level awareness questions, being able to truly get at the heart of the priorities and concerns of the family. All team members have some type of expertise, whether it be case management, whether it be motivational interviewing, speech language pathology. That's the great thing about early intervention. We all come from different backgrounds, so we all bring a set of skills. Everyone on the team, regardless of your role, should be able to explain early intervention and what a family should expect during their journey in early intervention. While that primarily is the role of the service coordinator, anybody working with NEI should be able to give a basic explanation of what EI is and what a family should expect while participating in early intervention. All team members should be able to explain the COS process and what the family's role is within the COS process. And Shelley, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's it. I think in terms of just making sure that we're able to share with families information regarding what child development is. I feel like, sometimes we don't, I don't know if it doesn't dawn on us, but we're able to share that information for families who may not have that reference. So, now is an okay time to say, okay, so what do you know about child development information, typical, non-typical, like Cal said. I think we need to make sure that families have a frame of reference, and not all do. Just stress that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it gives us that opportunity to help educate them more. If you see up on the screen now, this is the new and updated version of the decision tree. The meat and potatoes of it, though, are exactly the same as the decision tree you guys are used to seeing. If you look in the handouts, there's a version for you, a PDF version for you to open up and look at yourself. We're going to take about a 10-minute break here for a number of things. But first, you should read through, during the break, take time to read through each statement, picture how a conversation using this decision tree would look. Send us any questions you immediately have, and then use any extra time to take a break, let the dogs out, use the restroom, get some more coffee, whatever you need. And while doing so, though, think about each step of this flow chart, how it leads to using this decision tree with the family, and how it can fit into your guys' team's process. So we'll give you about 10 minutes. All right, as people are coming back in, feel free to send in any questions if you do have any about this decision tree. We are about to go through it, talk about the steps in it, and then go through some of the specifics, and then we'll go through some examples together. So we may address some of your questions there, but if you do have anything, go ahead and send it in. All right, as we're looking at this decision tree, I think it's important again to just touch on roles between the professionals, the most likely PSP, versus the service coordinator and anyone else that's there. When going through this decision tree with the family, the service coordinator really is there to make sure the family understands why their COS ratings, how they're used, and then helping the family navigate this process and encourage their input, where the providers are going to do a little bit more of the facilitating of the decision tree, providing examples, giving the family an opportunity to provide examples, weighing input from all, and kind of making the decision on how to answer each question. This tool is really, again, to help you guys guide conversations in each of the areas and lead the team to consensus. For some families, it might be helpful for the EISC to show the family the tree during the conversations. For other families, it might not be helpful. Try to use your judgment on how overwhelmed a family is or how much they understand it. If you are going to show the family the tree, make sure the service coordinator is there to lead them with the finger, to explain things to them, to point stuff to them, to make sure we're not adding to any confusion. We only want to use this to help the family participate and feel empowered to do so and understand what we're doing, rather than us just talking to them for 20 minutes straight and zoning out a little. We want them to stay engaged. That's definitely the case. If they stay engaged throughout this decision tree process, throughout the COS rating process, then when we roll into writing outcomes, they're continued to be engaged. We aren't going to have to try and re-engage them, which is extra hard to do. As you are looking through this, I'm sure you saw under each question, there's a box that says, let's think of some examples. This helps ensure we're making a thoughtful decision based on the child's functioning and that we have evidence to support our ratings. We want to give all team members, including the families, an opportunity to give any examples. And since we just shared the child's summary, giving examples of skills they're doing, and we just shared examples of age-expected skills. When it comes to this point where you say, okay, let's think about some examples, you've already given everyone there in the room the information they need to participate and answer that and provide examples. We've already kind of all talked about all of it. The first question we see on this decision tree is, does the child ever function in ways that be considered age expected regarding this outcome area? Based on if we answer yes or no to that, we provide some examples, then we decide is it a yes or no. If it was a no, we determine if the child's using functional skills that are close to age expected. If it was a yes to that, then we want to know, are they doing age expected functional skills in all aspects of this outcome? And seeing here, it makes sure to emphasize functional skills. So we're talking about the skills that we just described in our summary. We're not just talking about some isolated skills that we got from an evaluation. This is how functional they are and how it operates within their routine. If you're doing this virtually, you could potentially put this up on the screen share to see and then help navigate the family through there if you think that would be helpful. Again, you're going to need to read each family, use your judgment on what's going to be helpful and not add to the confusion there. Once we kind of answer those second questions, we talk about some examples again, we answer them. We're then looking kind of across the board, but to what extent the child is using either functional skills that are close, if we went down that no path for the first question, or to what extent they're using functional skills across all settings and situations. Or if we answered yes to the first two questions, then we want to look and say, are there any concerns about their functioning? And once we answer this third piece here, thinking about examples and answering it, it will lead us to our COS rating. So going back to this first question, there's some important things to think about and to remember. One item here, if we look on the right to this longer picture here with the red arrow going from the yes all the way down to the bottom, is that if we answer yes to this first question, to the ever question, knowing that even if we answer no to the next question and then saying that there's only occasional use, there's not a lot of extent that they're using age expected skills, our final rating is going to be that the child shows occasional use of some age expected skills, but more of his or her skills are not yet age expected in the area of this outcome. If we're answering yes to this first question, we need to do, keeping in mind that the lowest rating that we would get to then would be this occasional use. So they will need to at least meet this minimum criteria of showing occasional use of some age expected skills. So I think that's important to note on, because the question of do they ever function in ways that be considered age expected, it informs us on how we're defining ever. It's not just, oh, they did one close to age expected skill one time in an isolated incident, so we should answer yes here. It's, is there occasional use of some age expected skills is really there. If we can say they have at least occasional use of some age expected skills, then we definitely know we can answer yes to this question. And then the other piece here is this little note that we see right below the first question. And it says, performance of an age expected skill that emerges at a younger age is not enough by itself to answer yes to this question. So when you first read that, it's a little confusing, and you may have to read it a few times and think about it, but that's why we're doing this. I want to talk about it a little bit more. This note is basically saying that we want to make sure we're discussing skills that actually emerge at the child's current age when answering this question. It's really easy to muddy that conversation by bringing up a skill that a child that age may have, but it's really a skill that emerges at a younger age or a much younger age. For example, you're going through this process with a 30-month-old. Just because a 30-month-old walks around their house, which is a skill we'd expect a 30-month-old to have, we can't necessarily say, oh yeah, yes, they have age expected skills because they're walking. because really walking is a skill that we'd expect to emerge in that 12 to 16 month range. It's not us answering really, do they have skills that we'd expect at this age? It's skills that they have that we'd expect them to do, but they're not, they emerge at a younger age, so it's not enough to answer that question on its own. We'll go through it again in a little bit of slide. If it's a little bit confusing, you can go ahead and put in any questions you have too into the question box. And to touch on this other piece again of answering that first question, if we do answer yes, does the child ever function in ways that we consider age expected? We're not asking if the child has ever done a specific age expected skill a singular time. If a 10-month-old child only says dada once, we wouldn't necessarily answer yes to this. We're asking, do they utilize any of the skills that we consider age expected with some consistency to meet that occasional use of some age expected skills criteria? Answering the first question in the note. So the sentence, if you notice here, the sentence inside the red box about Sammy is that she uses both her hands to play with toys and enjoys throwing balls out of her ball pit. Sammy's 23 months old, and we'd expect her to be using both of her hands to play with toys and to be able to throw a ball. But that question, is that a skill? Is that skill by itself enough to answer the first question? We have to think, okay, if performance of an age-expected skill that emerges at a younger age is not enough to answer yes to this question, and then we know from child development, our child development knowledge, that throwing objects is around a 12-month skill, throwing a ball overhand with some intention, we see around the 18-month age. We see that those are skills of a younger child. We'd expect her to be able to do those at 23 months, but we don't expect that to be, it's not a 23-month skill. Since throwing the ball is a skill that emerges at a younger age, then that skill itself is not enough to answer yes to the first question. Now, if that child's missing this skill and there aren't any other age-expected skills, then that would help us say no to this, but that's very different than answering yes to the first question. I also want to just take a side note here to bring back something we brought up in the first half of noting how to incorporate observation and parent report and merging them into one fluid narrative. A sentence like this that we have in the red box about using both her hands to play with toys and throwing the balls, that's something that we would have observed, her using both her hands to play with toys. We may even see her throw a ball, but it's also something the parent reported to us that because parent reported it and we affirmed it through our observation, we can, put it in the narrative like this. But moving back to the decision tree, we're going to go through an example, walk through each step, how to answer yes or no to the first question, thinking about some examples. And we're going to do that with Sammy. So you'll notice here the use appropriate action to meet needs sample that we had from Sammy before. We talked about it when we were figuring out what age example or age expected skills to share. We'll see here. The first question is, does the child ever function in ways that be considered age expected regarding this outcome area? So let's think about examples. All right. We know before that we shared that she's running everywhere. She likes climbing up on the couch to get the things she wants. And she's also jumping off the couch, right? And we know that, attempting to jump off raised items like a step or like something like the couch here, as well as running more and climbing, are skills that we'd expect of a 23-month-old, as well as her helping to put on clothing, which we know she's definitely doing. So there, we know we have some age-expected skills, so we can answer yes to this first question. She does have some. So that leads us to our next question in the decision tree, which is the child showing age-expected functional skills in all aspects of this outcome and across all settings and situations. Again, we already shared, age-expected skills and the skills that Sammy's doing, so we can reference those back to when we say, all right, mom, dad, whoever, let's think about some examples. They may remember what we just shared and they can bring them up themselves, or we can reference them again, but it won't be the first time they're hearing them, so it'll be easier for them to understand. We see here that she is not showing aspects in all of the settings and situations, because when it comes to even bath time and eating with a utensil and her communication, those skills aren't quite what we would expect of a child her age. So we're going to answer no to this next question, which takes us to what extent is the child using age-expected skills across settings and situations? We'll reference these same examples. We're deciding if she's got occasional use here or many of them. We noticed that there was about, 1, 2, 3 of them that we mentioned here of skills of age-expected skills, with the gross motor skills of running, climbing, jumping, and her helping with dressing. And then when it comes to communication and bath time and meal time, we're seeing that her skills are not quite that of someone we'd expect. So I think we have a little more overwhelming evidence that she has some skills that we wouldn't of a younger child here, more of those foundational or immediate foundational skills. I think when it comes to the language, we'd even say her language is foundational. She's really not using any words, let alone using 2-word phrases to make her wants and needs met. With that being the case, we fall under the child that Sammy falls under. She shows occasional use of some age-expected skills, but more of her skills are not yet age-expected in this area. So then we followed the process there that led us to determining this rating. And that's pretty repeatable across teams and across individuals. We follow that same process there. And the examples that we provided in the summary and of age-expected skills helped lead us to this conclusion. And we built in places for the family to participate and give us their opinion. We're going to do the same thing here with Emma, looking at hers. Thinking here, what would your guys' answers be to, does Emma ever function in ways that would be considered age-expected regarding this area? Let's think about some examples. What do you guys think? Emma enjoys puzzles, which is great, but again, that's a skill that emerges at a slightly younger age, not at 27 months, that she's able to put together some puzzles. She's interested in books, but she's not yet saying any words in the books or labeling them. At her age, we would expect her to be using 2 to 3 word phrases, labeling those pictures, following multi-step directions. So if we look at the skills that she has, I don't think she quite has anything that is age expected of a 27-month-old. She may have a few things that are closer, and she may have some things that are younger, though. If we say no to this first question, then we go to ask, is she functioning in skills that are close to age expected in any of these areas? Let's think of some examples as we see here on the decision tree, right? Some examples that we think of is, like we mentioned before, her book reading is a strength of hers. So I think it's close, but we're not there at age expected. Her playing with blocks and puzzles, I think we're pushing a little bit, but we could say that those are some immediate foundational ones. But she's also following very little directions. And again, her communication is there. So I think we can answer yes to this question of, is she have any functional skills that are close to age expected? But when it comes to the question following that, to what extent does the child use functional skills that are close to age expected? That's where we bring up, her communication, her direction following, even that she's still mouthing on objects first when she encounters new items, which is a skill of a much, much younger child. So when we think about those skills here, it'll influence us to maybe side that she's beginning to show some of the early skills that are necessary for development of more advanced skills in this area, which takes us down to this rating here. So when we follow this decision tree process, it helps us evaluate the skills that she has more evenly. If, in any instance between individuals, when you're on your team, if your team is a PT and an SLP talking about this child, naturally PT may put a little more emphasis on some of these gross motor skills, and your speech therapist may put a little more emphasis on the communication skills, which may naturally sway their opinion. So if we're not following a process like this decision tree, you may see less consistency amongst your ratings there. But when we follow this process, as you saw with that, we really had to evaluate, okay, how many of her skills are that of a much earlier child versus how many are close to age expected functioning if they're not there yet. And when we kind of lay them all out on equal plane there, it helps us evaluate and answer these questions, which takes us to a rating. So we'll see more consistency. What we're going to do for this next one, we're going to look at Ed. And I'm going to give you guys some time to answer each of the questions, give you a minute or two to put your input in the chat. And we'll go through it together, and then I'll show you guys where we were on our poll back at the beginning of it. Read through Ed's real quick again, but give us your answer of what would your answer be? Does Ed ever function in ways that would be considered age expected regarding this outcome area? Yes or no? Provide some examples if you want. Go ahead and put those in the question box. All right, so we're still getting kind of a mix in yes and no's here, and it's kind of a reference here to his gross motor skills, which I think is exactly that question. I think this brings us back to the note at the top when we're looking at his gross motor skills, and this note of performance of an age expected skill that emerges at a younger age is not enough by itself to answer yes to this question. I totally agree that he is got some good gross motor skills here of running around, playing on the park, climbing at the equipment, working on climbing up and down the steps. But some of those skills we come at an earlier age that we would just still expect a 30-month-old to be doing. We have to think about what 30-month-old skills is he showing us here. And I even think that his walking up and down the steps, we'd want to see him around that 30-month-old taking even more initiative there. He's still holding Dad's hand sometimes, which is okay, but I don't think it's quite enough on its own to answer yes to that first question. I think he's close on them, but it's not enough. So we want to look in our other areas to see if there's anything else. And again, I don't think any of the skills he have here are quite what we'd say are 30-month-old skills. If we answer no to this first question, then we want to follow the decision tree. And our next question is the child using functional skills that are close to age expected or functioning. Yes or no? So go ahead and put your answer in the chat box there, or in the question box there. Does he have any that are close to age expected? And provide any examples you want to. All right, so here I think now we're getting a lot more yeses in this area, which speaks to this is where we really can reference those gross motor skills that we were just talking about before. That they are close to age expected functioning for sure. There was kind of that teetering line that we were deciding between answering that first question. So if we did answer no there, I think we can answer yes to this next question, because of those gross motor skills, which is nice, which then takes us down to what extent does the child use functional skills that are close to age expected? When we're thinking just about that question of to what extent does the child use functional skills that are close to age expected across settings and situations? And we're thinking about examples there. What's your guys' input? Is he beginning to show some of the early skills, or is he using many important skills that are necessary for more advanced? All right, it looks like we're kind of overwhelmingly beginning to show here, because a lot of his skills are younger, but he has some there, like we said, with the gross motor, and maybe a little bit in the feeding there, if that. If we agree here that okay, he's beginning to show some of the early skills, this takes us to our next rating here, which is that he's showing some emerging or immediate foundational skills which will help him or her to work towards age-appropriate skills in this area. So I think even here, going through this decision tree step by step here helped a lot more people reach the same consensus of the same rating. And if we compare that to our poll before, I think we will see a big variance in that. Yeah, if we notice here in our poll before, we had 30% of people thinking he was showing occasional use, 32% of people thinking he's not yet using skills expected, and 23% of people saying he's showing some emerging or immediate foundational skills. if we follow that decision tree, we get to mitigate a lot of that variance here, and we're going to have a lot more consensus and inter-rater reliability. That being said, it's not always perfect, and we're not going to always reach the same conclusion. But if we're following the decision tree, we're going to see a lot less of a split between that 4 rating showing occasional use and one of the 2 or 3 ratings here, because we've made sure we answered this first question first. You may see a little more conversation between these 2 and 3, but that's okay. That's a more acceptable because it is this final question. There's a little more nuance to it, but we'll see a lot more consensus generally and a lot less of a spread. So if you have any questions on that, go ahead and send them in, but we're going to kind of roll into our resources here and then be able to answer some more of those questions.
These are just some useful tools. Again, all about the tools, because I feel like if we have these things to put into place, the decision tree, the other tools that, Henry has shared, this is going to help us with that consistency issue statewide and, within our team. So just thinking about how you're planning for the cause. Who's going to be at the team meeting? Have I reviewed what's typical, what's not? Those sorts of things that I think, again, I go back to some of this probably happened pretty naturally previous to being virtual. Some of this stuff that would have conversations in the car, but we have to be mindful, we have to be purposeful. So this obviously is just in terms of planning, what do we need? How can we get that information that we're going to need to put in our back pocket to have some of these conversations?
I can go back to the other checklist if you want.
No, that's okay. Maybe because they really are just tools. Kind of those things that we should be doing. Some best practice, but some, you're not going to be able to function without doing some of these basic quality practices. So, maybe because they're in the slides, and I think we've shared the link for that, maybe we can take some of those questions that are still kind of lingering or out there. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the link to those checklists is in the participation or the participants' PowerPoint slides in the notes section there if you want to look at those checklists more. The big thing, to take away.
I even did a 1-pager with some of those, so that should have gone out in that email.
Perfect. The big takeaway here is those checklists identify lots of different things that we want to make sure we're doing, the quality practices we want to be following when going through COS and determining ratings, things like that, and that you'll see a match up between this flow chart and the steps and walking through this new decision tree with this quality practices outlined on the ECTA's sites checklists. Real quickly, I think Shelly already sent out an email about these. There are some video examples of people following a similar process on that same site. Want you guys to keep in mind that those are examples from another place. They're not perfect examples. They're not exactly what we just said, but they can be close. They're there for your reference. We also are interested in any counties that if they would want to feel like they've practiced this system and are doing well with it, and they would be interested in volunteering to record some videos of COS discussions and the decision tree and whatnot. We would love to talk to them about that, so please reach out to us at any of our emails or talk to your consultant and they can get information to us. Also, if you are worried about the amount of information that were included in some of these sample summaries, or you feel like you need to turn up your practices of assessment anymore, we also provided the link to motivational interviewing trainings that we are conducting in February, April, and June on there. So you should be able to click on that link through the slides as well. Moving forward, these are some ideas for you guys to think about on how you're going to take this to your team, reach some consensus, have some more consistency, make sure everyone's on the same page, and what resources you want to use. We can take the next 3 minutes to answer any lingering questions.
So I know a couple people had some really good questions, and I know that Lori needs to do her spiel. So maybe we'll take, do you think two? I mean, I hate
Yeah,
to not
and
answer, but
we'll need to do probably an FAQ to answer any
okay.
remainder of ones that you're on there. I know that one question that we got about was, whoa, a lot of the information, you included a lot of information in those sample summaries. I don't think all of that can fit into the IFSP.
Yep.
Which is a fair question. There's a reason we have the overflow page for you to have space to put those. And that's another one of the reasons why, even if you're including stuff on the overflow page, it's not always the easiest to read. But that's why we really want to emphasize that you are reading these out loud to the family, sharing them with them so you can give them that whole information, and they're going to be able to hear it and read it however they want. People learn different ways, get information and through different models and whatnot. So making sure that we are still reading and providing the family with that information is key too.
So I think Kenny had a question. In the new virtual age, any thoughts on how we could potentially use the decision tree with families? Is it okay to mail it ahead of time? Can we screen share? What do you feel like is the best thing? And I know my feelings on that, but I think we should probably.
Well, yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear yours too. I think we also, people say like, oh, well, I didn't get to see this decision tree prior to right now.
Uh-huh.
The decision tree can look really complicated. It's a lot of information to have on there. We didn't even want to just send this to you ahead of time without us being here to explain and go through it and answer any questions. So I wouldn't suggest putting the family in a similar place of, I wouldn't suggest giving it to them beforehand so they just can look at it without us being there to help them. But I do think there are situations in which it will be helpful to pull it out or share your screen while you're going through it and talking to the family about it. Even myself as a provider, when that idea had been pushed out to me, I was hesitant to be like, well, why do we want to show the family this? That seems extra complicated, but was encouraged to go ahead and try it. And it was very helpful in many settings. And even in some instances where I didn't think it was going to be that helpful, it gave the family something to ground them and understand what we're talking about and empowered them to participate a little bit more. And that's why you'll have your service coordinator there to sit next to them or to show it on the screen and help make sure they're getting it. You'll be able to walk through it all together and to talk about it more. So it definitely can be beneficial there.
Sounds good. Well, we're at noon, guys. Yes, thank you for hanging in there. It was a long webinar, but I feel like good information.
Yeah, we would love any feedback that anyone has, any, positive or negative. If there's more information you'd like to hear about, or if anything that was extra confusing, please let us know. And if you think this type of training would be beneficial to your whole team, this will be recorded, as we mentioned. And if you reach out to your consultant, there is a county-specific version that we're developing that can look at some more county-specific data and some more follow-up activities that you're welcome to ask for too moving forward.